The docks were eerily silent, the only sound around being the lapping of waves against the concrete piers. Samantha moved cautiously, alert with attention. From a young woman who had always been lost in the moment, she had turned into a woman who was always ready to kill or run. That was what the apocalypse had turned her into. But again, that was the price of survival. Her boots crunched on broken glass and debris as she walked ahead on the military base, which had been overrun months ago. The once bustling grounds of the military base were now brimming with abandoned vehicles and skeletal remains of those who had lost their lives fighting the zombies. But Samantha wasn't here to mourn the past. Most of these men had died fighting the zombies, trying to protect their city. But Samantha already knew how miserably they had failed. But all of that was history from ages ago. It had been 2 years since Samantha had been on the run, surviving every day in the apocalypse she had been caught up in like everyone else. And she wished to continue surviving. As she continued to walk ahead under the open sky, looking for anything that might provide shelter, her gaze fell on the submarine moored at the far end of the dock. It appeared massive, the dark hull glinting in pale sunlight. USS Vanguard, which must be the name of the submarine, was painted in bold letters on one side, the paint now chipped and faded with neglect. Samantha's heart raced as she stared at it, realizing how much help the submarine could be. It was perfect shelter and would provide her with security, make her self-sufficient, and most importantly, keep her away from the zombies. There was no way the creatures could claw past the thick walls of a submarine, no matter how much they tried. And one person would not be worth the effort for them anyway. Samantha glanced over her shoulder, her hand tightening around the handle of her machete. She knew the zombies might not be with her on the military base right now, but they were still all around her, their groans reaching her from across the walls of the boundaries spreading around her. Another thing which made her feel safe about reaching and surviving in the submarine was the knowledge that the zombies could not swim, and they would certainly not come to chase her in a boat. If they had no way of reaching her, it would only mean she would stay safe no matter what. Taking a deep breath, Samantha sprinted towards the submarine, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she did so. She had survived for a very long time on her own, and she was not about to let the zombies take her now. Despite only being an English teacher in a high school before the apocalypse had hit them, she had proved her resilience as the terrible time had unfolded. Her parents were long gone already, and she had no siblings to care for. Hence, it was just her, and she had done quite well for herself. Just like every other survivor out there, she had lost a lot of friends since the beginning of the apocalypse. But that was not something she could dwell upon for too long. It was how life worked in this madness. You lost people and moved on without having the time to grieve them, since mourning meant death. The zombies were everywhere, and one constantly needed to be on the move. Taking a deep breath, she finally raced to the submarine through the dock, which led her towards the giant metal body, which was suspended in shallow water, being held stationary through handles at the bottom. She opened the door, using all the strength she possessed in her body, and finally ventured inside the darkness. Using her flashlight, Samantha noticed that the submarine was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and cramped compartments. But to Samantha, it was a palace. It was going to be her home. The next few weeks were spent in exploring every inch of her new discovery, as she learned the systems inside and tried to make them work for her own as well as she could. The control room became her command center, its banks of monitors and controls now repurposed for her needs. She had always been good with technology, and even though a submarine was rather complicated, Samantha managed to find manuals in the control room, which helped her quite a lot. She could now use the large cameras located on the outside to suspect her surroundings and make sure she knew what was happening outside, even while she was inside and completely safe. The galley was already stocked with canned food and bottled water, and Samantha, too, had an abundance of scavenged supplies. Collectively, she knew it would last her for a few months in the least. She had even managed to get the desalination system working again, which actively turned seawater into fresh drinking water. Samantha herself could never believe on how much she had accomplished in just a couple weeks, but she had truly turned the submarine into her sanctuary. The place fulfilled all of her needs, making her feel comfortable inside it. The real challenge had been to secure the submarine, because despite all of the positive factors it held, Samantha knew she could still very well get attacked there. The zombies had an overdeveloped sense of smell, and they knew when a human was around. If they ventured onto the base, they would easily find her. In order to ensure safety, she had welded the hatches shut, leaving only one single entrance, which was nothing but a narrow access hatch on the top deck of the submarine. She had rigged up a series of alarms and traps to alert her of any intruders that might come her way. She wanted to keep both the zombies and other living survivors away from her. Each day she spent hours scanning the docks through the periscope, watching for any signs of danger she might come across. Despite the constant threat of the zombies looming over her head, she had still managed to thrive. She had turned the submarine into a home, filling it with books she had scavenged from the base's library and small comforts like blankets and candles, which she had managed to find around the city. In order to keep track of her time and days, she continued writing the journal she had been writing since she was just a little girl. This documentation of her thoughts and experiences helped her stay grounded, making sure the apocalypse kept feeling real. It was her only way of staying sane and holding on to her humanity in the midst of the chaos which surrounded her life entirely. Her days had developed a routine she was beginning to enjoy, bringing her a sense of peace and calmness. She had always enjoyed routine, which was why working as an English teacher in a high school had been good for her. Now, in the middle of the apocalypse, she had resumed that routine, which made her feel a little bit like her old self again. She woke up at dawn every single day and diligently checked the periscope for any signs of movement. Once that was done, and she was sure that nothing had breached her sanctuary during the night or day, she spent the morning tending to her supplies. In one of the storage compartments, she had managed to set up a small garden using the plants she had found around the base. She remembered the experiment her students were doing of using lights to grow plants and had tried to make it work for her as well. She used grow lights and hydroponics to grow vegetables, and even though it was not much, but it was enough to supplement her diet as much as it possibly could. She had lost a lot of weight since the apocalypse had begun, but so had everyone else. It was impossible to care much about nutrition when the entire world had been torn apart. In the afternoons, she ventured carefully out onto the docks, scavenging for any other supplies she could find around her. The base was an excellent place to look for things, since it contained almost anything she might need. And the best part of it was that most of the places were still unlooted, making it even easier for Samantha. It was still dangerous work, but Samantha had become an expert at moving silently and staying out of sight. She had learned to read the patterns of the zombies as they moved around and was now adept at predicting their movements, which helped her avoid them. Noticing them for a very long time had taught her that they only came out to hunt for a few hours in the middle of the night, and that was when they were at their most active. During the day, They were slightly dull, and defeating them was easiest. Hence, venturing out at night was suicide, but during the day, Samantha could still defeat them. She was enjoying the silence which had become a part of her life, and wanted things to remain that way. But it would be delusional for her to believe that she would remain unfound. Samantha woke up at her usual time, quickly scanning the area through her periscope. Everything seemed stable and untouched, making her feel comfortable. Despite that, she was not dumb enough to let her guard down. After completing her usual daytime chores inside the submarine, she returned to her periscope, noticing something unusual all of a sudden. A group of zombies was right before her, larger than she had ever seen before. The sight was so unbelievable for Samantha that she had to double-check, pinching herself to make sure it was real. The last few weeks had been so peaceful that she had not expected them to appear all of a sudden. But she was grateful that it appeared at a time when she was still inside and not venturing out onto the docks. That would put her in an extremely vulnerable position, making things awful for her. The zombies were moving erratically towards the submarine, their twisted bodies shuffling across the concrete. Samantha's heart raced as she saw them, larger than any group she had seen in one place together. It was horrifying. But she did not have the time to stand and worry. It was time to act. Without hesitating for a single second, Samantha grabbed her machete and climbed up to the access hatch, peering out cautiously while she did so. The zombies were much closer now, their terribly loud groans only growing louder. Samantha knew she couldn't fight them all on her own, and if they somehow found an access to the submarine, she would not be able to defend herself, which meant that the only way to save herself would be by sealing the hatch as quickly and efficiently as she could. But as she turned to climb back down, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the one thing she had been expecting, but it scared her too. A loud clang echoed through the inside of the submarine, like claws scraping against metal. The zombies were trying to invade her space. She turned around, just as another sound reached her ears, confusion causing her eyebrows to furrow. The sound of claws against metal was replaced by the sound of metal hitting against metal. Samantha spun around to scan the docks, going back through her access hatch when she saw him. A man stood right in front of her on the dock, his back against a shipping container. Samantha could see he was armed with a rifle, a string of bullets across his chest as he remained surrounded by the undead, their glowing red eyes locked squarely on him. Samantha was slightly stunned. Any normal person would have some hint of fear in their eyes when they were surrounded by this many zombies, but his brown gaze was fearless. Samantha hesitated, unsure of what was happening. She had survived this long by staying hidden and avoiding contact with any other survivors. She had been on her own from the very beginning. But something about this man's desperate situation, which had taken all attention away from Samantha, struck a chord in her heart. She could not just let him be. Without wasting any more time, she made a split-second decision. Grabbing a flare from her backpack from inside the submarine, she lit it up and hurled it towards the zombies, distracting them from the bright light. This gave the man a chance to break free. He sprinted wildly towards the submarine, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. Samantha climbed down the access hatch and sealed it behind her, her heart pounding loudly. She waited, her hand still on the handle of her machete. A few moments later, there was a knock on the hatch, 3 quick raps, followed by 2 slow ones. It was exactly the signal she had used to communicate with other survivors in the early days of the madness. She knew it was going to be him. Breathing deeply, Samantha opened the hatch and the man climbed inside, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was extremely tall and broad-shouldered, with a military bearing and a face that was both rugged, yet looked kind. Samantha felt as if she could instantly trust him, knowing that he would never hurt her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with masculinity. "Samantha. And you?" "Captain Arnold," he replied, staring at Samantha. "How did you land here, and how long have you been living inside the submarine?" "A few weeks. I checked the entire base when I came here and did not see you. Where did you come from?" Samantha asked in reply, wanting to know everything about him before she decided to actually trust him. "I was stationed here when the apocalypse hit and have been living here since. I venture out here and there for supplies and weapons, but I live on the other side. I was gone for a few days and only returned today, and I think they unfollowed me. But now I can see they might have followed your scent as well," he replied. "So what will we do?" Samantha asked Arnold, who nodded at once, heading straight for the control room. She stood there as he tinkered with a few controls that Samantha had not bothered touching, finding them useless. To her surprise, an entire concealed glass hatch opened from above them, and Arnold quickly climbed up towards it, aiming his rifle on the small opening. Took him a few minutes while he shot the zombies, all of them falling dead, while some of them ran away quickly. Samantha was both surprised and impressed at his skills, knowing fully well that his arrival would change a lot of things, only if they stuck together. But a part of her said they were going to. It was in the best decision for both of them. Once the two of them were sure that everyone was dead or gone, they went out and cleared the zombies from outside, removing their bodies entirely. Samantha was grateful for the help because she knew if it was not for him, the zombies might have somehow managed to invade the submarine by now. That was the last thing she wanted. Once the area was cleared, Arnold turned towards her. "So, how do you want to do this?" he asked seriously, confusing Samantha. "Do what?" she asked. "Do you wish to stay alone, or do you want to work with me to secure the entire base for ourselves so we can find some element of safety? Neither of us can do it alone, but together, we might be able to make it happen." Samantha looked at him, knowing he was right. Even though she had stayed alone throughout the apocalypse, she could not stay alone forever. It was time she took the companionship that was being offered to her and made the best out of it. It was going to be rewarding if she looked at it positively. "Let's do it together." Arnold smiled, and the two of them shook hands, finalizing their deal. They did everything they could in order to make the base more secure, which included using traps and explosives to thin the numbers of the zombies hovering just outside the base. They worked together to repair defenses, set up barriers and watchtowers, and everything else possible to keep the zombies at bay. For the first time in years, Samantha was planning actively for the future and not just 2 days ahead of her. She expanded her garden by bringing it out of the submarine and onto the base, and they worked to start the larger desalination plant to clean water at an even quicker pace. They were rebuilding their sanctuary one day at a time, and Samantha began to feel more peaceful. Arnold's presence made her feel safer and braver. She was learning from him and seeing a glimmer of. She had survived on her own for so long, and now she finally had a partner, someone who understood the struggle of this time and shared her determination to survive. Together, they were stronger and could face anything the world threw at them. Samantha stood on the docks, watching the submarine which she still used, and the rest of the base spreading behind her, which had turned into her home as well. Even in these times, she felt lucky, as if she had accomplished the impossible. She was trying to build a life for herself, and Arnold was right there with her, and together, the zombies could do nothing to them.